Hey there, folks. Welcome to Spectrum Pulse. We talk about music, movies, art, and culture. And today, we're going to be talking about the newest album from How to Dress Well called The Anteroom. So I was not expecting this. And if you've been following Tom Krell's career arc as How to Dress Well for the past couple of years, I think that's a reasonable statement to make, given as he's gradually taken steps away from the misty, melancholic, alternative R&B sound to something that's more pop-friendly, culminating in 2016 with the Jack Antonoff-produced album Care, an album that did not totally stick the landing, but did provide me with Salt Song, one of the most infectious and gripping indie pop songs of the decade. If there was something that should have gotten the single push, it probably should have been that. But with that being said, pop was not really a natural fit for Tom Krell, so if he was going to stay in that lane, I expected some careful tuning and refinement for the next album. Hell, it'd probably be even more lucrative in the long term to go in that lane, right? Well, what I didn't expect was this. The sort of genre pivot that flew not only in the opposite direction, but playing past his alternative R&B roots to something quite different, to what he himself described as an ambient dance record where the energy never goes above 3 out of 10. Which, I don't know, it could work, I guess. It's hard to tell. It might fit closer to Tom Krell's comfort zone emotionally, but it also seems like the sort of experiment that could really misfire if he wasn't careful. So alright, fine. What did we get out of The Anteroom? Well, you know, throughout the first 4 or 5 listens through this, I honestly did not think I'd have enough for a full review, that I'd just wind up putting this on the trailing edge as an overlong, frustrating genre pivot that honestly gets a little bit toxic the more I dig into it. But on some level, I did feel I had to talk about this album because simply explaining the roots of those feelings is really tricky, especially as some are praising this album as a return to quality. They like this more than his last one. But for me, yeah, you know what, I can see an audience for it, but it's the How to Dress Well album that I would find the most difficult to revisit, or whether I'd want to revisit it at all. And I don't think it plays to any of his strengths, especially coming off the songs that I have really loved from his past 2 albums. And to discuss why that's the case, we need to start off with the biggest change, the production. Now, I'll freely admit I don't exactly have the greatest sets of comparisons in electronic music when it comes to the increasingly dour and distorted tones that Tom Krell picks up for this album, but in comparison with the fluttery pop arrangements and co-production from Jack Antonoff on Care, this is definitely a pivot, especially considering the embrace of glitch, increasingly icy synth tones, and beats that feel more blocky and sterile. Hell, the vocal production itself is often a lot more layered and muted, with Tom Krell's willowy tones and admittedly really strong falsetto often buried beneath reverb and distorted masks and pushed further back in the mix, which might as well be my first issue out of the gate, because while I get the artistic purpose for doing this in order to emphasize that further disconnect and distance from other people, Tom Krell's delicate but emotive tones have consistently been one of the greatest draws. So that intimacy, why would you obscure it? And that's before you consider that these are some of the harshest electronics that he's ever used. And that can be a real mixed bag whether or not the tones actually complement each other. When the skittering grooves, they feel more discordant or off rhythm. On the one hand, you get the scrabbling, distorted whirs around the title track, which I actually kind of like, or the borderline Sophie-esque stuttering of Vacant Boat, except this time with some competent mastering. Again, that's good. But on the flip side, you get the awkward, glitchy fragments around Body Fat, or the increasingly slapdash bass mixing and inability to sustain a groove on A Memory, The Spinning of a Body, or that chiptune shoved into Hunger and it doesn't fit at all, or how incredibly aggressive the closing track Nothing tries to be. It just leaves the wrong sort of sour note coming from Tom Krell, less convincingly angry or furious and just kind of pissy. And a big part of this is how gothic this album's trying to be. And while most of this will come through in the lyrics, which we'll get to, the brand of goth that Tom Krell's approaching is more primal and guttural, which is weird for him anyway. And while it might be mirrored in some of the glitchier elements, you get the sense that a truly potent, distorted edge has been muted away or never quite approached, especially with songs that can rarely build to a stable groove and all seem to go on way too long. And Tom Krell's played fast and loose with the ideas of structure and music before, but given how much of a knack he had for a stable, developing hook that we saw on Care, I don't think that pitching some of that out the window was a smart choice this time around. Yeah, it fits more for electronic music, but especially when we get songs like Love Means Taking Action that could have had some real swell building off the hook, and they just don't. And this takes us to the content. And you know what, I'll give How to Dress Well this. I've always admired the ambition to push the lyrics into weirder, more conceptual and oblique territory in R&B. And And the Anteroom is by far one of his most abstract and impenetrable albums to date. You get snippets surrounding a relationship that's sputtered out, juxtaposed with a disturbing amount of gory iconography, oceans of blood and exposed skulls, and a disturbing amount of cannibalism, where when on July 13th, No Hope, No Pain, Tom Krell references a brother who got into black metal, and there's a part of me that can see a similar influence in the lyrics creeping here. And hell, like black metal, when you can actually make out the lyrics, the poetry is actually pretty good, and the symbolism mostly comes together in the story that's being told. At the very broadest level, Tom Krell is writing about on this album to chronicle a particularly dark period in his life, and it's easy to see that the act of writing it is wearing on him very heavy, as well as a breakdown of a relationship that plays out across the album. We'll get back to that in a second, but what I actually really like about songs like the title track is how it actually calls him out directly in his lack of courage to truly end his life, and it targets the performative elements of his angst that's now being represented in his art and the lie that's implicit there, highlighting a certain cowardice to truly deal with the end consequences that come with death. And as much as the cannibalism pieces feel really lurid, I'm not going to deny it's an apt metaphor for artistic consumption of another in a relationship, like on Hunger. And there is a certain power in the woman repeatedly calling for Tom Krell to deal with his shit and take action to truly love her, and when he can't, she leaves him. There's a consequence there. And yet, if we're looking for what really sours me on this, it's the issue that's been keeping every How to Dress Well album from true greatness, and it's more evident than ever here. The framing. To put it bluntly, Tom Krell's self-awareness is very inconsistent, and it seems incapable of taking solid responsibility for the things he says, does, and does not do in this relationship. The first and most immediate example that every critic's highlighted is body fat, where he's got a yearning artistic connection with somebody, and he wants her to work through her own demons the same way he is, but then he describes them as, there's so much anger and pain in your body fat, and he sings it like he's trying to be tender and sympathetic. And if he was intentionally trying to say the worst thing possible in the most dissonant way, I'd almost applaud him, except similar awkward choices keep surfacing, and it's not like the framing hasn't been an issue for Tom Krell before. The passive aggression directed at the negative signals and how he was so apparently good for her on A Memory, The Spinning of a Body, the numb hurt that she faces on July 13th, No Hope, No Pain, where any attempt to try and sympathize comes across really stilted and undercooked because he's not willing to admit that he's felt the same thing or actually had the same sort of experiences. And with Love Means Taking Action, he describes losing his best friend, his lover, like this because he feels blue and now it sucks. I mean, for all the poetic abstraction, you're defaulting to this language. Doesn't it kind of make your message feel a little bit shallow? But where it truly tilts into toxic is the closing track, Nothing, where he goes all out on the blame game, and at least in the messy situation where I'm not sure if the song's supposed to be from hers or his perspective. If it's the former, it's possible, it's palatable, but it ends the album on a really dark note that doesn't match with the other chosen iconography that is darker, and especially doesn't fit after Brutal, where the split was being framed as more inevitable, they're going on their own ways. Now, if it's from his perspective, well, it winds up feeling incredibly bitter, and it doesn't really make much sense, because if he dealt with his shit and took action, or stopped directly channeling her issues into his art, it could possibly be resolved if he had that force of character. But either way, it might be a realistically ugly ending, but there's no catharsis or sense of conflict reaching its endpoint, just a flat sense of pissy inertia and stasis, none of which Tom Krell can convincingly convey, no matter how many vocal filters sound rough that you pile on. But in the end, look, I'll be blunt and say that I don't really like this that much. The poetry's decent enough, and I think there are some decent ideas in the electronic fusion with alternative R&B, but the grooves rarely coalesce in a satisfying way, and the framing means that good poetry gets pushed to some really ugly ends. And for Tom Krell, who has spent so much of his career projecting vulnerability and aching, sincere emotion, this is a painfully awkward turn at best, and it really does not come across well. But as such, for me, it's a very light 5 out of 10, only recommended for the diehard fans, and even then it feels like I'm being generous. If you're curious, or if you're more into this sort of down-tempo, downbeat electronic music and alternative R&B, give it a try, but you might wind up being very disappointed. Hell, I know I am. So yeah, thanks a lot for watching. You'd like to like and subscribe, I'd be more than grateful. Yeah, this review is pretty negative. I get why, folks, but I was trying to like this, and it just turned out uglier the more layers I uncovered, and especially considering there was some real potential in some of the poetry to bring it all together. The fact that it wound out with these ends just really soured on me, I gotta be honest. Beyond that, if you want to buy or actually stream the album, links down there below. Got the poll up there for you all to tell me how wrong I am, because I know there's some people who are really high on this, so go, have fun. Beyond that, anything else I might be able to do to improve my presentation, I'm all ears. If you guys want to get involved in my scheduling process or help support the channel, link to my Patreon is right over there, where 3 times a week you guys get to vote for my schedule, and once a week for the higher tier contributors, you guys get to add albums, movies, or even a top 10 list to that schedule. More details right over there. You want to see my schedule, it's on my Instagram, link down there below. But till then, I'm Mark, you're watching Spectrum Pulse, and I'll see you next time.